Ever had that morning where your phone just feels, I don't know, dumb?
Hmm.
You reach for social media, maybe some music streaming, or even just trying to turn on a smart light and zip. Nothing connects.
Right.
Your Wi-Fi signal is strong, so what's the deal? Well, chances are you're actually bumping up against a hiccup in what we call the cloud.
Exactly. And when the cloud stumbles, there's one name that often comes up loud and clear. Amazon Web Services, AWS.
AWS.
Absolutely. It's like when AWS sneezes, a huge part of the internet catches a cold. It really is the plumbing for so much of our digital stuff.
Okay. So for those of us whose eyes kind of glaze over at all the tech talk,
Yeah.
let's get down to brass tacks.
Sure.
What is AWS really, in
Yeah.
simple terms?
Think of it like your utility companies. Electricity, water, they provide essential services.
Right.
AWS does something pretty similar, but for computing power, for online services. So instead of businesses buying and, maintaining all their own expensive servers and storage,
Which sounds like a huge headache.
it is. So they just rent the digital infrastructure they need from AWS to run their websites, their apps, you name it.
So it's like businesses are just plugging into this giant ready-made source of digital power instead of like building their own digital power plants.
That's a great way to put it. Exactly. And AWS is, well, they're the biggest player by far.
Really? How big?
Some estimates say they host the infrastructure for about a third of the top 100,000 websites.
Globally. A third. Wow.
Yeah, and that works out to something like 50 million websites total. It's more than the population of Spain.
That really puts the scale into perspective. Okay, so give us some names we'd recognize. Who's using this digital utility?
Oh, it's almost harder to find corners of the internet not touched by AWS. You've got streaming giants like Netflix, Disney Plus Earth.
Sure, use those all the time.
Right. Then travel platforms like Airbnb, sports hubs like ESPN. They all rely heavily on AWS running things behind the scenes, delivering their services right to you.
Okay, so here's the key question, I think, for you listening. Why should you, just living your daily life, care if this company, AWS, that you might not even deal with directly, has a problem?
Well, because when AWS has an off day, it can hit you right where you live, digitally speaking. It can directly impact your ability to do all those things you just take for granted online.
Like what?
It's kind of like a big disruption in the electrical grid. Suddenly, streaming your favorite show just grinds to a halt. Or online shopping. Impossible. Even your smart home devices, your speakers, your lights, they might just go silent. That's the kind of widespread effect we're talking about.
Okay, so the mission for this deep dive then is to really unpack what these AWS outages mean, why they happen, and I guess why they should be on your radar.
Exactly. Because look, these cloud systems are incredibly sophisticated, right? But it's crucial to remember they're not magic. They're not infallible.
Not mad.
The cloud isn't some untouchable thing up there. It's built on actual physical hardware, servers, cables, and really complex software. And both of those things, as we all know, can fail.
And you mentioned this before we started. One surprisingly common reason for these failures is just people making mistakes. Human error. Seems kind of low tech for such high tech stuff.
It really does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, the reality is, like one industry analyst put it, the most likely source of cloud outages is human error. Even with all the automation, humans are still configuring things, doing maintenance.
So you're telling me someone hitting the wrong key could actually take down chunks of the internet?
Unfortunately, yes. It can happen. There's a classic example from 2017, a major AWS outage. An engineer was doing some routine maintenance on their big storage service, S3.
Okay.
A simple typo, just a mistyped command. And it accidentally took way, way more servers offline than they ever intended. A misconfiguration with, well, huge consequences.
Wow. It's just staggering to think a tiny slip-up like that can cascade into something so massive.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is in these systems. And it's not just human oopsies either. You also have the software itself.
The code.
Yeah. These cloud platforms are incredibly complex, and they're constantly being updated, patched, new features added.
Right. Always changing.
Which means there's always a chance for, software glitches, bugs.
So sometimes it's not a person messing up, it's just a flaw baked into the system.
Precisely. There was another AWS incident where an automated process, one actually designed to add network capacity, when things got busy, it went wrong.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it triggered this huge flood of internal network traffic that just overwhelmed their own equipment. So the system meant to help actually caused the problem. Kind of a self-inflicted wound.
That's like trying to fix a traffic jam by opening every single lane at once and causing total gridlock instead.
Exactly.
And speaking of networks, that whole infrastructure, the pipes of the internet, that must be another weak spot.
Oh, absolutely critical. The cloud runs on this incredibly complex web of networking gear, routers, switches, and also the domain name system, DNS. You called it the internet's phone book earlier, which is a great analogy.
Yeah.
If any of that stuff malfunctions or gets misconfigured or DNS has problems, poof, services can become completely unreachable.
Right. We've all had that frustrating experience where a website just will not load. Is that sometimes because of these deeper network issues?
It definitely can be. Remember that huge Facebook outage back in 2021?
Oh, yeah. Scary stuff.
Right. Now, that wasn't AWS directly, but it was caused by a bad configuration update to their own routers. It basically wiped Facebook off the map for hours. AWS has had its share of network problems, too. In 2021, they had issues with network congestion between their systems and some big internet providers,
Yeah.
like a massive traffic jam on the information superhighway, slowing everything down or stopping it completely for major sites.
So it's not just digital code floating around. There's real physical stuff involved, too. Data centers.
Exactly. These are massive buildings, just packed with servers.
Yeah.
And they need a ton of power, 204/7.
I bet.
They have backups, of course,
Yeah.
generators, big battery systems. But power failures still happen. Actually, some studies suggest power issues cause like almost half of all data center outages, something like 43%.
Wow, almost half. That's kind of worrying. So what happens when the lights flicker in the cloud's actual house?
Well, back in December 2021, an AWS data center did have a power outage. And what made it worse was that the backup power didn't switch over smoothly for everyone.
Ouch.
Yeah. So that caused downtime for some really popular services like Slack, Imgur, and beyond just power, hardware fails. Servers die, storage drives give out, cooling systems can malfunction.
Huh?
All that physical stuff needs constant attention.
And then there's the really unpredictable stuff like nature. You don't really think of a hurricane knocking out your online bank account.
But yeah, the connection is totally real. Things like severe storms, earthquakes, even wildfires can absolutely damage the physical infrastructure.
Like power lines, fiber optic cables.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or think about those huge undersea internet cables. Sometimes they get cut accidentally, even by something like a ship dragging its anchor.
No way.
Yep. Now, AWS designs its whole system to be spread out geographically to try and minimize this kind of risk. But still, a really major disaster hitting a key region, it can definitely cause significant problems. There was an incident back in 2012. A big storm knocked out power to an AWS data center, took services down.
So it's not all just ones and zeros. Sometimes it's actual concrete and cables getting hit by real-world stuff.
Okay, what about the scary stuff? Cyber attacks. Can hackers take down AWS?
Well, it's possible. Things like DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service, they try to overwhelm servers with just a flood of junk traffic.
Right.
And they can definitely cause disruptions. But large-scale AWS outages caused by a successful cyber attack, they're actually pretty rare.
Yeah, AWS invests a ton in security. They have services like AWS Shield specifically to fight off those DDoS attacks and other threats. The general feeling among experts is that most of the big AWS outages come from those internal things we talked about, the human mistakes, the software bugs, not usually external attackers.
Huh.
Like one security pro said, most outages are caused by an organization's own people and their processes.
Okay, so just to kind of recap the causes then, it sounds like the cloud can go dark for a whole bunch of, well, almost human reasons. Mistakes, bugs in the code, network glitches, physical problems in the data centers, maybe even a bad storm. And cyber attacks are actually less common for these big outages.
That's a great summary. Exactly. It's just a massively complex system, right? And you know that old saying in tech, to err is human, but to really solve things up, you need a computer.
Ah, yeah.
When you mix humans and super complex computer systems at this kind of scale, the chance of an outage, even if it's rare, it's always kind of there.
Okay, so paint the picture for us. Something goes wrong deep inside AWS. What does that actually look like, from their side? And how does that turn into me staring at a spinning wheel on my phone?
Right. So it often starts pretty quietly, deep inside one of those huge AWS data centers. Maybe an engineer makes the tiny config mistake, or a batch of servers loses power for a second, or maybe a key network link just gets totally overloaded.
Okay.
Instantly, AWS's own monitoring systems, which are incredibly sophisticated, they kick in. Alarms start going off, alerts fire, pages go out to the on-call engineers. Think of it like silent alarms tripping inside the giant digital machine.
So they have internal tripwires constantly watching.
Constantly. Now, for us, the users, the first sign is usually our apps start acting weird.
Right.
Maybe Spotify starts skipping or buffering forever, or Netflix just flat out refuses to load. And our first thought is usually, is my Wi-Fi okay?
Totally. Blame the home router first.
Always. But then, the collective internet brain kicks in.
Ah, yes. The modern diagnostic technique. Jump on Twitter and search for #ISitDown or #AWSDown.
Exactly. You start seeing those tweets pop up. Is Netflix down for anyone else? Can't get into Slack. And the key thing you often notice is that multiple, seemingly unrelated services are all having problems at the same time.
Ah, that's the clue.
That's the big clue. It's likely an infrastructure problem, like AWS. And then people swarm to sites like Down Detector, those sites that track outage reports from users.
Yeah.
During a big AWS event, you can see like tens of thousands of reports flooding in for Amazon and AWS within minutes. It's like everyone on the block sticking their head out the window at the same time when the power flickers.
We're all digitally looking around going, is it just me? So what about AWS itself? How do they tell us what's going on?
Their main channel is the AWS Status Dashboard. It's a web page that's supposed to show the real-time health of all their different services in all their different regions. Well, yeah. When an outage hits, you usually see the little status lights change from green to orange or red, and a message like, investigating increased error rates will pop up.
But I feel like I've heard stories. Hasn't the status page itself sometimes gone down during major outages? Which seems, I don't know, ironic, like the fire alarm failing because it caught fire?
This is definitely ironic, and yes, it has happened.
Yeah.
There have been times when the status page itself was affected because, well, it also relied on some of the AWS services that were broken.
Oh, wow.
They've worked hard to make it more resilient, run it on separate infrastructure. But you can still sometimes see delays in updates while their engineers are scrambling just to figure out what's actually happening. And sometimes third-party monitoring services actually detect the outage before AWS officially posts anything, just by watching traffic patterns and error rates from the outside.
Okay, so while we're hitting refresh on Down Detector, what's happening behind the curtain at AWS? Must be chaos, right?
Less chaos, more like controlled, high-pressure intensity. They spin up these virtual war rooms.
Yeah.
Engineers from networking, compute, storage, databases, all the relevant teams, they jump in together.
All hands on deck.
Totally. They're digging through just mountains of data system metrics, logs, alerts, trying to find that needle in the haystack, the root cause. It's incredibly complex. Imagine trying to find one faulty switch in a city's power grid while alarms are going off everywhere.
Yeah, stressful.
And sometimes the problem itself can make things harder. In one outage, a network failure actually blinded some of their own internal monitoring tools. They had to rely on older system logs just to piece together what went wrong.
And it's rarely just one single thing breaking, right? It often triggers other problems, a chain reaction.
Exactly. That's the cascading effect. If a core service like S3 storage has a problem, suddenly tons of other services that depend on S3 start failing too.
Because they can't get their data.
Right. Or if there's massive network congestion in one part of the system, it causes timeouts and errors in lots of other connected services. It's like dominoes falling.
So what did the engineers do? How do they stop the dominoes?
They try to isolate the problem. Maybe they'll try to reroute network traffic around the broken part, like setting up a detour on a highway.
Okay.
Or they might try to bring backup systems online faster. During one of those 2021 outages, they actually had to reroute internal DNS traffic as a quick fix to get things working again, a digital detour.
So while the engineers are fighting the digital fire in their war room, the rest of us and all the businesses using AWS, we're just waiting. Hit and refresh.
Pretty much. Companies that rely on AWS will usually put out their own messages. Our cloud provider's having issues, we're working on it, hang tight.
Seeing plenty of those.
Meanwhile, #AWSoutage is probably trending on Twitter as everyone shares their pain. Now, some companies, especially big ones like Netflix, they've built their systems to be more resilient. They use backups, they spread their stuff across multiple AWS regions. Yeah, so sometimes they can ride out an outage with less impact, although maybe your streaming quality drops for a bit.
And then, fingers crossed, things start to come back online.
Yeah, usually gradually. As AWS gets fixes in place and stabilizes things, you'll see the status dashboard start turning green again. Your apps slowly start working. Maybe a bit sluggish at first as things catch up.
How long does that usually take?
It really varies. Could be minutes for a minor glitch, or it could be hours for a major one. That big S3 typo outage in 2017. It took over 4 hours to get everything fully back to normal, partly because they had to carefully reboot so many systems and work through a huge backlog of requests.
4 hours feels like an eternity online. And then, after the dust settles, AWS tells everyone what happened. You mentioned those reports.
That's right. After a major outage, they usually publish what's called a post-mortem, or a post-incident analysis, a PIA. These reports go into detail. Here's what broke, here's why it broke, and importantly, here are the steps we're taking so this doesn't happen again. And they can be surprisingly open. After that 2017 typo, they admitted the mistake and even mentioned some older systems hadn't been restarted in years, which made recovery harder.
Wow, that's pretty transparent.
Yeah, these reports are actually really valuable learning tools for the whole tech world. They give insights into just how complex running things at this scale is and lessons learned when the cloud, has a stormy day.
Okay, let's talk more about some of those specific stormy days. We've touched on a few, but these high-profile outages really show the impact. Let's start with that big one, the February 2017 typo incident.
Ah, yes, the S3 outage, sometimes called the $150 million typo, because that was the rough estimated cost just to S&P 500 companies.
Ugh.
So yeah, February 28, 2017, happened in AWS's biggest, oldest region, US East 1 in Northern Virginia. An engineer was doing maintenance on a S3, the simple storage service.
Right, the storage.
Exactly. The plan was to take just a few servers offline. But a command was typed incorrectly, and whoops, a much, much larger chunk of servers got removed from service accidentally.
Just from one wrong command, what kind of stuff broke?
Well, S3 is used for everything, storing website images, videos, app data, backups, you name it. So when a big part of it went down in that region, tons of major websites and apps just stopped working or slowed to a crawl.
Like who?
Oh, big names. Business Insider, Medium, Slack, Trello, Quora. Lots of them were hit hard. And they had weird knock-on effects, too.
Like what?
People reported their internet-connected light bulbs and thermostats stopped working because the service they used, IFTTT, relied on the affected AWS region. Even parts of Apple's iCloud had problems.
Wow. So it wasn't just websites. It was hitting smart homes, other cloud services. How long did it last?
The main disruption was about 4 hours. But it was a huge wake-up call. Just showed how one seemingly small human error in the cloud could have these massive real-world consequences.
4 hours of chaos from a typo. Okay, fast forward a bit. December 2021 seemed like a really bad month for AWS.
It really was a rough patch. December 7th, 2021, that was a big one. Again, mainly hitting that critical US East 1 region. People were calling it an internet snowstorm because it lasted most of the day. Like 8 hours of major problems.
8 hours? What went down then?
Oh, it was widespread. Netflix, Disney Plus streaming died for many. Amazon's own website, their e-commerce, even their package delivery operations were hit hard. Think about warehouse workers, delivery drivers.
Wow, real-world logistics grinding to a halt.
Yeah, and financial apps like Venmo, Robinhood, food delivery like Instacart. Even Amazon's own Alexa assistant was having major issues. People couldn't use their smart speakers.
So it hit entertainment, shopping, finance, logistics, smart homes, pretty much everything. What was the cause that time? Not another typo.
No, this one was different. AWS said it was a failure in some of their network devices.
Okay.
And that failure got amplified by this huge unexpected surge of traffic inside their own network.
Like the system overloaded itself.
Kind of. It seems like connection attempts just spiked massively, overwhelming the core network that ties all the different AWS services together. It caused this chain reaction, this cascade of failures. The fact that Amazon's own stuff, like their Ring cameras, went down too, really showed how deep the problem went.
Okay, and then just a week later, another one, this time on the West Coast.
Yep, talk about bad luck.
Yeah.
December 15th. This time it hit their US West 1 and US West 2 regions. It was shorter, maybe about an hour of major impact, but still significant.
Who got hit that time?
Similar list, different region. Slack, DoorDash, Netflix again, Disney Plus, Weavy, Snapchat, Zoom. Lots of disruption.
What caused that one?
AWS pointed to network congestion again, but this time it was specifically between their network and some external internet providers. Like a traffic routing problem that got worse when they tried to fix an initial slowdown. It just showed that even different regions could have these back-to-back issues.
Felt like digital whack-a-mole that December. And wasn't there one more incident right before Christmas?
You remember, right? December 22nd. This time it was a power outage. Again, in a data center in that busy US East 1 region. Affected a subset of servers.
Power again?
Yeah. The power itself was restored relatively quickly, but some customers had lingering problems for like up to 17 hours as things had to recover and resync.
17 hours? Wow, who was affected then?
Slack, again, Udemy, Twilio, Okta for logins, even the website for the New York City subway system, the MTA.
Huh. So that one really drove home that it's not always software. Sometimes
Okay.
it's just the power goes out and the backups don't work perfectly.
Exactly. These examples, they just really highlight that ripple effect, don't they? When AWS stumbles, it's not some abstract tech thing. It's our streaming, our banking, our games, our communication, even our robot vacuums and smart doorbells, as we saw.
Yeah, the smart home stuff is almost creepy when it stops working because of some distant server. It feels a bit dystopian sometimes, that one company's cloud issues can affect so much.
It can feel that way. But again, it's important to remember these big outages stand out because AWS is usually so reliable. They're like, those 100-year storms. Rare, but impactful.
Right.
But when they do happen, man, they are a wake-up call about just how interconnected and maybe fragile our digital lives have become.
Okay, so we've seen the ripple effect. Let's really dig into how these outages hit us, both us as individuals, just trying to live our lives, and also the businesses built on AWS. For regular folks like you and me, what's the immediate feeling?
Frustration, usually.
Yeah.
It's being locked out of your favorite apps.
Right.
Your Netflix binge night is suddenly canceled.
Oh, the Lord.
Or you need to buy something urgently on Amazon and the site just won't load. Or you ask your smart speaker for the weather and silence. Digital silence.
Yeah.
And we saw it clearly in 2021, even things like smart locks not working, or your Roomba refusing to start its cleaning cycle because it couldn't reach the cloud. It's like your house's IQ suddenly drops.
Your home gets temporarily dumb.
Exactly. And for people trying to work, if Slack goes down or Microsoft Teams has issues because it relies on cloud infrastructure too, boom, instant forced coffee break, lost productivity.
An involuntary timeout.
Pretty much. And beyond just the inconvenience, there's a real frustration, maybe even some anxiety. Imagine needing to check your bank balance urgently or make a stock trade when the market's moving fast and your app is just dead because of an AWS problem.
Yeah, that goes beyond inconvenience into potentially stressful territory, especially depending on what you're trying to do, telehealth appointments maybe, or if you're a rideshare driver relying on an app.
Absolutely. It ranges from annoying for most people to genuinely disruptive for some.
Uh-huh.
Okay, now shift gears to businesses. The impact there must be huge.
Financially, I bet.
Oh yeah, big time. Remember that old estimate from 2012? Amazon.com itself losing something like $66,000 for every single minute it was down?
Wow. Per minute?
Yeah. Now scale that across all the thousands, millions of businesses using AWS. We mentioned that $150 million estimate for S&P 500 companies just from that 2017 S3 outage. The collective losses can be enormous.
And it's not just lost sales, right? It's productivity, too.
Definitely. If your employees can't access the tools they need, the data they need, work just stops. If identity services like Okta or Duo go down because they run on AWS, people might not even be able to log into anything. Whole companies just locked out.
That sounds like a nightmare. And what about, reputation? Does a company get blamed even if it's AWS's fault?
Often, yes.
Yeah.
End users, the customers, they don't always know or care why the app isn't working. They just know their app isn't working.
Right. They blame the brand they see.
Exactly. So companies end up doing damage control, sending out apologetic emails or tweets, trying to manage the fallout, even when the root cause was AWS.
Do they get compensation from AWS? Like a refund?
Sometimes. They have service level agreements, SLAs, with AWS. If uptime drops below a certain percentage, they might get service credits. But honestly, those credits rarely, if ever, cover the full cost of the lost business or the hit to their reputation.
And I imagine it's even tougher for smaller businesses, startups.
For sure. They might be totally reliant on AWS, maybe haven't invested in complex backup plans across different regions or clouds. An outage during a key sales period, like Prime Day or Black Friday for an e-commerce shop, that could be devastating. Or a small software company whose users just can't use their product for hours. Really damaging.
It must also make some companies think twice about putting all their eggs in the AWS basket. Maybe look at competitors.
It definitely fuels those conversations.
Yeah.
Rival cloud providers certainly don't miss the opportunity to point out AWS's issues when they happen. A major outage can absolutely push companies to explore multi-cloud strategies more seriously.
But maybe there's an upside. Like, it forces everyone to think about backups.
Yeah, there is that. It's like a mandatory fire drill for the internet. Disruptive, yes. But it forces companies, and even us as users, to confront our reliance and maybe think about plan B. But overall, a big AWS outage is just a really bad day for millions of people and thousands of businesses. Really drives home how much we lean on this invisible utility.
Okay, so given how bad these outages can be, What's being done to stop them? Or at least limit the damage? It feels like there must be a constant effort, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's like this ongoing arms race almost
Yeah.
between the growing complexity of the cloud and the safeguards needed to keep it stable. AWS itself pours massive resources into resilience. Redundancy is key.
Redundancy meaning backups for the backups.
Kinda, yeah. The big concept is availability zones, or AZs.
Yeah.
Think of an AWS region like Northern Virginia as a cluster of multiple separate data centers. Those are the AZs.
Okay.
They're designed to be independent, separate power cooling networks. So if one AZ has, say, a fire or a flood or a major power failure,
The others in the same region keep running.
that's the goal. And many AWS services are built to automatically fail over. If they detect a problem in one AZ, they just shift the work over to a healthy one, ideally without you even noticing.
Like automatically rerouting traffic.
Exactly. And then you have the multiple regions globally. The idea is a huge problem in, say, Virginia shouldn't take down services running in Ireland or Tokyo. Remember that 2017 S3 outage? Big impact, but mostly contained to that US East 1 region.
So it's like having separate power grids in different states or countries.
Good analogy. And within each data center, layers upon layers of backup. Multiple network paths, huge backup generators, UPS battery systems, sometimes even their own electrical substations. They test this stuff constantly. The whole goal is high availability, aiming for that 99.99% or even 99.999% uptime.
Those extra nines matter.
They really do at this scale. And after big failures, like in 2017, they changed procedures, maybe slow down how fast they do maintenance, add more checks to catch human errors. They're always trying to improve detection, response. They even do things like chaos engineering.
Chaos engineering sounds
Ooh.
chaotic.
It's intentionally breaking things. In a controlled way, of course. They simulate failures, servers dying, networks lagging, just to see how the system reacts and find weak spots before they cause a real outage.
Huh. Trying to anticipate disaster. Okay, so that's AWS trying to build a fortress. What about the companies using AWS? What's their playbook?
Smart companies know they can't just rely 100% on AWS's fortress. They need their own defenses. The big one is, don't put all your critical eggs in one basket.
Meaning?
Meaning maybe run your application across multiple availability zones within one region. That's pretty standard. Or, for more resilience, run it across multiple AWS regions.
So if Virginia goes down, your app keeps running out of Ohio or Oregon.
Exactly. Or even go multi-cloud, use AWS for some things, maybe Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud for others as a backup, or for different parts of the system.
Or like having two different internet providers at home.
Precisely. It adds complexity. Costs more, for sure. Yeah. But for really critical stuff, it might be worth it. AWS offers features to help with this disaster recovery setups like active-active, active-passive. Different ways to have a backup ready to go. And services like Route 53 can act like traffic cops, automatically sending users to a healthy region if one goes down, like an emergency evacuation route for your data.
So building your own escape hatches.
Exactly. And having a solid plan for when things go wrong, an incident response plan. Knowing who does what, how to assess the damage, what temporary fixes you can put in place, maybe disable a non-essential feature to keep the core service running.
And monitoring, keeping an eye on things.
Crucial. Monitoring your own systems, obviously,
Right.
but also watching the cloud providers help. Like we said, sometimes companies spot AWS issues before AWS announces them. Early warning is key.
And talking to your users, right?
Absolutely vital. Transparency. Having your own status page, using social media. People are generally more forgiving if they know what's happening, even if it's a widespread cloud issue. As one monitoring company says, early detection and proactive communication are everything.
So after an outage, companies learn too.
They have to. They do their own postmortems. Okay, why did we get hit so hard? Where was our single point of failure? Maybe they decide they really do need to go multi-region after seeing an outage take down their primary one. They adapt.
So it's this constant cycle. AWS tries to prevent outages. Customers try to build resilient systems on top. Outages still happen sometimes. Everyone learns, repeat.
That's pretty much it. It's a shared responsibility. AWS builds the levees, installs the sensors, has the emergency crews, the customers. They buy flood insurance, keep flashlights handy, and have an evacuation plan.
Good analogy.
Because ultimately, no cloud provider can promise zero outages. But huge effort goes into minimizing how often they happen and how bad they are. The motto is kind of hope for the best, plan for the worst, assume outages will happen, and be ready.
Well, this has been, wow, a really fascinating deep dive. So bringing it all home, it really sounds like a major AWS outage is kind of the modern version of a snow day, or maybe a big power blackout, but for the digital world.
That's a great way to think about it, yeah. It's a sharp reminder that even now, in this super connected age, things can still just stop working unexpectedly. The cloud, sounds magical, but it's still fundamentally someone else's computer, just on a massive scale. And computers, well, they break sometimes.
And when that particular computer breaks, we see those ripples everywhere. Frozen bank transfers, websites going dark, smart assistants suddenly mute, businesses just stuck in neutral.
But, and it's a big but, it's also important to remember the baseline. The cloud, especially AWS, is usually incredibly reliable. That's why these outages are news. And there are armies of really smart engineers working 247 to fix things when they break, and crucially, to keep making the whole system stronger.
So maybe the takeaway for you listening is next time your favorite app feels flaky or website won't load, maybe before you reboot your router for the 5th time,
Yeah.
just pop over to Twitter, search for #DoviSootage. Might save you some trouble.
Could do. And, take a little comfort knowing that these things are almost always temporary. A lot of people are working really hard behind the scenes to get that digital world humming again.
Right. So I guess even the biggest clouds need a break now and then. But like the sun eventually coming out, AWS always seems to return to power up our digital lives.